And you could kind of have things fluctuate and adjust according to the current situation, rather than governmental systems just doing things that they want to do. They'd actually have to sell this to the public,
I
right?
was
Like
just thinking that
encourage
they should be
people.
lobbying us, not the other
Yes,
way around.
exactly. That $1 that you put into tax turns into a nickel of work.
When you're doing taxes, like not only, choose where your money goes, but also there should be an option to kind of um, give your feedback on what you think is wasteful and should be done away with, like the TSA, for
Yeah.
instance.
The political system constantly makes mistakes, and well, also does some very terrible things intentionally, and there's no consequence. Whereas if we did the same things, if we made the same mistakes, the consequences would probably be dire.
All right. In the name of the kitchen, the sink, and the microscope, I am Casey Rochford, your priest for the day. And we would really enjoy it if you would like, share, subscribe, and go to patreon.com/ksmvidcast and tithe.
And behold my naked monkness. No, just kidding. um, I'm Eric Rosenblatt, and Casey and I, we write our own music, and at the end of most episodes, we put a song that's sometimes new, sometimes old. And there will be one at the end of this episode. So stick around for that. And yeah, that said, what do you want to talk about today, Casey? I have a feeling kind of already.
Yeah, I think I would like today's sermon to be about taxing the church. Like, do you think it's something that we should be doing, or do you think that actually falls under the purview of like freedom of religion?
Ooh, man, that's an interesting question. I mean, it's, well, okay. So I guess it's kind of like, why are they one of the few exempt organizations when everybody else is taxed mostly? I mean, if you have a nonprofit, I guess that falls into that category too, but that's kind of a
Yeah. I mean,
specific kind of category.
if you ask me, they probably should just have to fill out nonprofit blah 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 crap like every other nonprofit organization, because I mean they don't really generate like products to sell and blah blah blah, right? So like the amount of money that they get isn't really necessarily like a steady flow of income, or
Yeah.
but um they do kind of operate as a business in a sense. So they're in this weird gray area, and they tend to dip their toes into politics, which kind of muddies the waters with the whole First Amendment and stuff anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
And
and if
concept
that's
of
the
the
case, like
separation.
if you want to be a political church, maybe you should pay tax.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah, the whole concept of separation of church and state and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Um, well, and I guess yeah, I mean, although I think taxes are bogus to begin with, but if everybody else is paying tax, and like if you're a nonprofit and are exempt, and of course in that case you do kind of have to show for your work, essentially, like, oh, here you demonstrate that you're nonprofit continually. And
Right.
maybe churches should do the exact same thing, that they basically are a nonprofit organization, rather than just by the nature of you being a church uh exempting you. Maybe you have to, maybe we should just make it so it's like, okay, well, got to be nonprofit.
Well, there are these like mega churches with
Mhm.
these, like super rich people up there proselytizing and just basically getting like loads and loads of cash tax free.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I don't
Private
know.
jets and stuff like that. Like,
Yeah, it's like I understand the need to let people exercise and practice religion freely,
mhm.
but that can absolutely be done without making them tax exempt.
Yeah,
Um, I mean, honestly, like the amount of money just from the mega churches that you could be adding to the tax revenue could do a whole lot of stuff that Jesus wanted you to do, right? Like
yeah,
feeding the poor and stuff, right? Like,
sure.
why not then? Like churches should be happy to contribute to that.
Sure. Well, and I mean, yeah, I guess if your church organization, and there are many that work this way, if your church organization uh, does good for the community, right, hands out helping people through tough times, feeding people, clothing them and stuff like and you're operating specifically for that goal, then you are pretty much like a nonprofit charity organization, and that I think could that should exempt you from that. But yeah, if you're simply essentially akin to like a club, well, clubs have to pay taxes too. you
Right.
know like
Yeah.
if you're not, if you have no output other than sermons, I think that, yeah, the tax then would apply.
Right. And, it's not like neighborhood churches are going to, be paying out of their own pocket money, like, because it would operate in a similar fashion, right? Like you don't
Sure.
bring in a certain level, then you don't pay tax, right?
Well, and yeah, and a small community church would probably not pay any tax at all, if I mean, or a very small amount, because you've got you can deduct a lot of things out, your operating expenses, how much you're paying for the church space and maintenance, and all that, whatever fees you have to pay, your utilities, all that can be deducted out, and then what you're left with is only a very small amount that would be taxed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that makes sense.
Like I feel like there would be a really strong argument to make toward churches in general to say, like I had mentioned a few minutes ago, um, think of all the good you could do for the community by raising this tax revenue. And and of course, the same argument applies for anybody else who gripes about paying tax. Well, it goes to shit that I wouldn't really want it to go to. It's wasteful and it goes to this and I don't like that and blah blah blah. So it raises the question, like, if churches were like, well, we'll only pay tax if it's a la carte, we get to pick where our money goes to. Well, then I'd be happy to say yes, but that opens the floodgates. Like everything else should be a la carte at that point, right?
Well, that's a completely tangential conversation that would probably go
Yeah,
on for a while.
yeah,
Well, yeah, I mean, I like one issue I guess I take with taxes in general is not necessarily like, oh, this isn't going to something that I use. I just feel like the way taxes are then dispersed is very inefficient and corrupt. And honestly, I think a church, probably from the humanitarian. Oh, hi, Floyd. From a humanitarian standpoint, I think a lot of churches, especially the smaller ones, do actually do. They're very efficient at helping people. Like all that money that your tithes and stuff tends to go in a large, like a very large percentage of that goes directly to help people in need. Um,
yeah,
and that's a good thing. And nonprofit organizations, a lot of them are similar. Whereas bureaucratic systems, government systems, well, yeah, your tithe dollar essentially, while your forced tithe dollar turns out to be like a nickel of help at the end. So much of it gets burned through the system that like hardly any good work is actually done. And that's why governmental systems need to extract so much tax, because it's just kind of flushed down toilets along the way to its end. And so, it's like they need billions of dollars to get like $100,000 of actual product out the other end.
But think about that. Like if, the subject of tithing got me thinking, like if churches had to pay taxes, a lot of that tax would come out of what has been tithed, if that's the correct conjugation of the verb. But in that respect, then when you tithe at a church, you would be like directly contributing to a certain pool of tax, should that be earmarked for certain things, right? So like the church could say, hey, if you come here and tithe, this is the good that your money will go to on a countrywide scale or statewide scale or a local scale, whatever it is that it's parsed out to, right? And I don't know that's not a bad idea, actually. Like if you have certain types of businesses pay into certain, tax revenues directly, like it's not just like all going into this pool that some bureaucracy behind the curtain decides how it's doled out in the end. But if it was like, oh, all this tax came from a church, it goes to, feeding the hungry and blah, blah, blah. All this tax came from, like mini marts downtown. So it goes to the police so that they can keep things from, getting stolen. And, that kind of makes sense, right?
I kind of like that. Well, what you'd said like before, like a la carte taxation,
sort of crowdsourcing,
sort of makes a lot of sense. Because if you think about it, well, I guess the counter argument would be, well, but then a lot of these good things that I think are important won't get any revenue. But the fact is, if you think it's important, you're not alone, more than likely. I mean, there's a lot of things everybody can kind of agree on, like, oh, we got to take care of people's health. We got to take care of the homeless. We got to take care of the community, keep things clean, provide parks and green spaces and whatever. Those are things that I think pretty much everybody can agree on. And maybe there would be a great benefit from that, in that only the projects that have a lot of public support will get that support, and stuff that doesn't, well, it won't get that much support. I mean, it'll probably get something, but that'll filter things out. I mean, isn't that what people vote for anyway? The reason they vote is because you're like, oh, this person represents me, my constituency, this area here, and these are the things that we want. Well, why even have that middleman in there? Just go direct to the people, like whatever. Like imagine if you got your tax bill, basically. Well, sales tax would be kind of difficult, obviously, but then, like you said, the business itself could, you'd be like, oh, I know when I go into Walmart that they've chosen to pay tax for roads and I don't know, homeless shelters or whatever. That's where they're directing their money. So you would know that. But like if you had to pay, your income tax, which is, that's the national scale. Well, sometimes the states have income tax too. But like imagine when you do your, you do your taxes every year, your form that you fill out would have a bunch of check boxes, like, oh, or percentage. You take your 100% and you divvy it up amongst a bunch of categories, and you're like, hey, I want to put 50% of my tax to national defense, or I want to put this much to education, or something like that. I think that would be kind of cool. And
I mean, to compromise and make it simple, because like I could see how that would really bog things down and on the clerical end, is to maybe have like 6 different packages where there's like, it's not totally a la carte, but there's like different tiers or whatever. Like, oh, this one, covers mostly this stuff, and some of this other stuff is a little bit less. But that's a way that you can take the necessary stuff that people might not want to contribute that much to, but you need them to, and be able to kind of lump it in there so that you at least have a sense that you'll always have enough for infrastructure and, all this stuff that you absolutely have to have, but like common people might not think about, right?
Well, maybe we should be thinking about it though. Like people ought to know how things work. I mean, most people don't know how water gets to their house, or what happens when you flush the toilet. What like it's just a hole in the ground that there it goes. They don't realize there's an entire structure, like a huge, massive system of processing behind that.
Mm-hmm.
And
poop fairies and all this other stuff.
Yeah. And maybe we ought to be more aware of that. And I think if we had a more selective system, then people would be inclined or maybe encouraged to learn about those things. Like, oh, well, what is this thing here? And, it might, one nice thing about a system like this is it would allow it be flexible. So as things change, it's like, okay, like right now, the environment is a big deal, and you would see a lot more focus on the environment. Or let's say global tensions rise and people are like, ooh, you know what? I think this time defense, I'm going to put some money into defense because everybody's like scared. Like, oh my God, what if, and you could kind of have things fluctuate and adjust according to the current situation. And then maybe I mean, that would actually, I don't know. I think that would be kind of nice. I mean, most of the important stuff would still get covered. There's enough people who care about all of this stuff that it would get enough revenue. And plus, then again, too, here's the other benefit. Rather than governmental systems just doing things that they want to do, they'd actually have to sell this to the public, right?
I was just thinking that they should be lobbying us, not the other way around.
Exactly. Yep. Like, hey, prove to me the need for this thing, sell it to me. I want, like, because that's not how it works now. They kind of do it after the fact, essentially. So that might be it. Well, and it might also encourage these different governmental organizations and departments to actually tighten their belt a little bit and be more efficient. They might have to be. Because the thing is, like I said, that $1 that you put into tax turns into a nickel of work. And where does all that money go? Well, it just gets burned, essentially. It's like the efficiency of that system. It's like 5% efficient, essentially. So all of that is lost to heat or something like that. And that, maybe that should change. Well, not maybe, definitely that should change. And this might be one way to kind of help it along, I guess. And
I had a thought about, like when you're doing taxes, like not only, choose where your money goes, but also there should be an option to kind of give your feedback on what you think is wasteful and should be done away with, like the TSA, for instance.
Like a feedback section where you could kind of like
you kind of vote on like what the country really needs and doesn't need.
Mm-hmm.
And that should be actually like done quite often.
Because the whole system, it's kind of an ivory tower. It's sort of like its own little world that is unaware for the most part of the rest of the world. Like it doesn't see the ground level. And and that's probably the biggest problem there. And another thing I think with something like this is it would be important to kind of like reconstruct things if this were to be implemented, um, so that it's more transparent, I think, more
Mhm.
under the control of the general public, and you can see a lot more, and your feedback actually gets some traction would be nice. So, like, if,
Yeah.
say, for instance, 90% of the taxpayers put in their feedback section, like, get rid of the TSA, well, they'd have to get rid of it. Like, because clearly people don't like it.
Yeah.
Um, that kind of thing. And that should also be public information too. Like, okay, oh, tax time rolled around, we just did taxes, and here's the results of the polls. Like, here's what the people believe, and you can look at the actual numbers. And if you see something like that, like 90% of taxpayers said no TSA go away, then and then it doesn't happen, right? Then, well, there would be some consequences for the system. And that's a big problem too, is that, like, the political system constantly makes mistakes, and well, also does some very terrible things intentionally, and there's no consequence. Whereas if we did the same things, if we made the same mistakes, the consequences would probably be dire. And so, yeah, that's another thing that would have to change, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, there definitely needs to be consequences for the government because like daylight saving time, right? Like we
Mm-hmm.
constantly keep voting to get rid of it. And they're like, yeah, but no.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and yeah,
And
I
that's a
mean,
that's a
the only
like
problem I see though is the increase in propaganda that there would be, right? Like the
mhm.
government wants to keep all these cushy jobs for themselves, and they would be like, here's all these statistics on why you need the TSA. Like, well, we already get that, but like we would start getting that for like golden toilets too, like
Yeah. Well, yeah, there might be ads for park systems or something, which, I mean, is a good thing. I think that I, like you said, we should be the ones that are that they're coming to us trying to sell the services that we're paying for, essentially. Like, they're
yeah.
lobbying us. Uh,
Mhm.
that would be, because, I mean, then it's like they have to basically justify their existence. Um, Otherwise they won't exist. And yeah, I mean, I think there is a big problem, like you kind of touched on a little bit ago, that these political systems, they've grown, and they're huge, and there's all this staff and buildings and things like that, and they're like, oh no, if we shut down the TSA, all these people are going to lose their jobs, and oh, if we shut down the IRS, like, oh my God, think of all the people that would be out of work. Like, well, there was a time when those things didn't exist and it wasn't harming anybody. There's still plenty of things to do that are
Mhm.
not bureaucratic. And all of the skills that people learned during their time working for the government are applicable in other places too. Like, I mean, there's plenty of jobs for paper pushers and stuff like that, rubber stamping, that's, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, in general, churches getting away with not paying tax, I think that's kind of a silly uh, exemption to it. Like they're pretty much the only ones that get this free pass, right? Like
Yeah.
if you earn money in some fashion, even through just donations and such, you've at least got to file the proper paperwork and be transparent with the
Mhm.
government, and even if they aren't transparent with us, but whatever. Um,
Yeah.
like I think they definitely should be required, above a certain level to pay tax. And
Well, if everybody else has to pay it,
right.
then I think that they should have to pay it, unless they operate as a nonprofit. like a proper nonprofit that
Right.
is like follows the same rules as everybody else.
Yeah.
Um, that yeah, I it's simply by being a church, like that shouldn't be all that the only variable that switches you over to being tax exempt.
Actually, that's kind of a good idea. Like the whole nonprofit thing, like if you're actually being a nonprofit, that means you're probably providing a lot of the stuff that your tax money would have gone to, right? Like
Yeah,
you're taking those the people what they tithe and you're directly applying it to like feeding the hungry or whatever.
yeah,
But what if other businesses could do the same and not pay tax? Like,
maybe.
hey, like I am directly contributing to the betterment of the neighborhood or my state or whatever by doing blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
You can show that. Yeah, okay,
Sure.
cool.
Well, and
Why
that
not?
already kind of exists in that you can get tax deductions for charitable things, like and of course, from a corporate standpoint, there's a financial interest that, oh, hey, if we donate this money to some cause or something like that, then we can reduce our tax load a little bit. Um, but that's I think that ultimately is a good thing. Like Ronald
Mm.
McDonald House or something, or if like Walmart gives a bunch of money to some kind of charity or something, like, well, okay, fine, that's awesome. Don't we want that? Like these charitable organizations do a lot of good.
Yeah, I got mixed feelings because a lot of them don't. Yeah, like they're just like the government and they kind of squander it and misappropriate funds and stuff. But the biggest problem I actually have is the hypocrisy of it. Like you're not really donating if you're doing it to get a reward.
Yeah.
Like if you get a tax write-off for donating money, I mean,
Well, even if you
I've never once gone to Goodwill and donated stuff and been like, yes, give me my tax receipt, please.
yeah.
I'm always like, no. Like, what do I need
Well,
that for?
you still get a reward though, in like like I sponsor kids in disadvantaged parts of the world, and I don't get anything back other than a good feeling. I just got a
Yeah,
letter from one of the kids that I sponsor in Uganda, and he's like, "There's these little boxes they can write in some things," and it was like he basically thanked me for loving him, and
oh,
that's amazing.
I have a quick story about that. Uh, Last time I was there in the States, I was kind of looking through some of my parents' stuff, trying to put things in storage and whatever. And I opened this old letter dated from like just before I was born in 1981. And it said, "Thank you for being my parents," and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, do I have a sibling that I didn't know about? Like,
Hmm.
and it turned out it was just like one of those like pay some money for a kid in India sort of thing.
Oh yeah,
And the kid like wrote a letter
yeah.
and
Sponsorships. That's actually
for a
I
second I was like, I have a long lost sister
oh
somewhere.
yeah. That's funny. I think everybody should do that. It doesn't cost much money. I mean, if you have a little bit of extra money, get a few less lattes, and boom, you can like change a life. Like that's a huge deal. And a lot of these organizations are religious in nature. But I kind of think for those people in those places, um, church organizations are kind of the lifeline. It's the hope that people have, and it's like, okay, we could be atheists here and stuff, but I can look at that and I can see the benefit that a church would have in a place like Uganda.
Well, okay. Well, let's put that under the microscope real quick.
Mm-hmm.
So these churches go to these other countries and do a lot of good. Yes, undoubtedly. But the reward that they're getting is they're proselytizing to all these other people, basically like pushing their religion on vulnerable populations. And really bugs me. All these missions and
Some
stuff like
do.
that.
Yeah, well, okay, that there's some do. Um, but there's a lot that don't. Like one of the sponsorship
How can you
that
tell
I
for
have.
sure though?
Well, okay, so one of them, they don't go to the country. What they do is they direct funds to local church organizations within the community that you're helping.
Mm-hmm.
And so they don't go there. They don't push their religion. They just simply help out a church in the local that already exists in the local community that then helps the people in that area. And that to me seems pretty legit. Like, I mean, because it's like that's their own,
It's
you
it's
know,
still
they're
a church over there pushing a religion. Like, I mean,
well, I wouldn't say okay, but think about it. Like if you live in a place like Uganda, um, the, the, we have it good here, and it's really easy to look past the value of that faith that because it's a transitional thing, in my opinion. That um, it won't be that way forever. If things improve and the society becomes much more advanced and capable, then I think you'll see religion tend to wane as it tends to do. But for now, in war torn and poverty stricken places, like that might be all you got.
I
And it does still like the that holds people together. It brings the community together and keeps them from losing hope.
here's
And
the thing. What prevents churches here who are collecting this money to do good? What prevents them from donating that money to local churches with that particular culture's religion already established, right? And just giving them the resources to do the good under the umbrella of their religion. Because that's the only part that I take issue with is like if faith is a good thing, it shouldn't matter who you're directing that faith to. You know,
yeah,
like a church should be like, hey, as long as you have some kind of faith, you know, and you know, like I can feel like a bond, and you know, I'll be glad to help you. But it's not like that. It's more
well,
like,
no, but
well, I'd help you, but like we should talk about
it,
Jesus real quick. You know, like
it can be. I think some organizations do operate that way. But that speaks to a much bigger issue, which is like essentially it's similar to politics. This
mhm.
division amongst people. It's like, you know, can't we just all believe in a higher power and that's fine? Who cares what that higher power looks like or the story? Like, let's share stories of things and just simply believe together, and it doesn't matter what you believe. That would be a nice uh situation, I think. But yeah, I mean that's something that's been going on well as long as humans have been on earth, essentially, is this kind of
Yeah.
religious divide.
Well, it'll
Like, oh,
never
my
go.
God is the right God, and
Yeah.
anybody else who doesn't believe that, like there's
It's
something wrong with him.
it's the perfect storm. It's something you can't prove, and everyone feels they have to be right. You know, like so.
Well, like I said, it's just like politics.
Yeah, it's human nature. Like religion will always kind of rear its ugly head
Well,
throughout time.
you're right. It is human nature. I think that's behind that, and that's one of those things that religious people, if you, whether you're religious or not, religious thinking emerges kind of naturally. It's something you
Yeah,
have to fight against because there are people who were religious, deeply faithful, and they kind of um, changed, saw, gained a different perspective, and now they're atheists, but yet they basically have become religious in politics or something. Like it's the same behavior, just with a different coat of paint.
right.
And that's something I think that, you know, maybe that's something that we should be trying to push, is this sort of togetherness idea of like, you know, because really it doesn't matter at all. Like, well, you can't see the face of God. So what does it matter what face people think God has? It shouldn't matter as long as like the doctrine is just and good, then it shouldn't matter.
That's one of the funny parts of the Bible. There's like two different books. I forget which one's like Matthew, Isaiah, who knows. One says, no one has seen the face of God. And the other says, I have seen the face of God.
Oh, there's so many contradictions in the Bible, and not just the Bible. I mean, you could go to the
Right.
Quran and find a lot of similar things.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the
It's
thing.
made by
Like,
humans. It's going to be flawed. You know?
yeah. Well, that, like I was saying, if you read the Bible and you read the Quran, they're so similar. Like,
Well, yeah,
pretty clear that that is the same God, essentially.
it is.
You know, and Jesus and Muhammad are basically kind of the same concept, maybe the same person, who knows.
Yeah, the Abrahamic religions are all the same. It's just you've got like Judaism, Christianity added a book, and then Islam added another book, you know.
Well, and
or
all of them
prophet.
are like at odds with each other in
Yeah.
conflict. I mean, it used to be hot conflict, and today it's much less hot, although it does come up occasionally.
That's hot.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, you pretty much all religions, though, no matter where you go in the world, there's very similar themes throughout. And that definitely, that either to me demonstrates that the God is basically the same God, that whatever God exists is basically the same, and people are just interpreting God differently in their own human context, or human nature builds these religions kind of in the same fashion.
So I can't believe I didn't think of this until now, but one of the interesting things I've discovered moving to Germany is that tax money goes to churches. Like, you pay tax to churches. You can even like claim, like there's really no separation of church and state, even though it's a more secular society than the United States is. It's a weird paradox, right? Like, as the United States is all like, we're very secular, but they're not.
Yeah.
And then Germany is all like, yeah, like, believe what you want, but you know, like, we've got church tax and you can put your religion on your driver's license and shit. Like, or I think you used to, but not anymore. But like, that kind of integration is totally a thing here. But, you know, like, I mean, things work. So like that kind of sets a precedence, right? Like, you could tax churches, you could kind of have a flowing system. Like, churches could be like, hey, we'd like to do some good. It would really help if we had a little bit of influx of tax money to facilitate that.
Mm-hmm.
So like,
I think
if that's a thing they would actually do, I'd be all for that, you know, like,
that you're right. I think but it comes down to being able to demonstrate functionality, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can't just say, well, I'd like to do this. That's exactly what politicians do. You have to prove that you have done it on some scale, right? You'd
mm-hmm.
be like, hey, we don't have a lot of money as a church. We only have like 100 members, and there's not much we can do. But look here, we've taken the $5,000 that have been donated over the course of this time, and there's now 6 people that are not homeless. We've helped them out and fixed that problem. Or look, there was a single mom whose car broke down, and we paid to have her car repaired. Like, this is what we did. So if we had more, we could scale this up. That would be important.
What if everything was done like science? You know, like, you got to work for a grant. So if you want tax money, you should go on like the public TV channels or whatever and make your argument to the people, you know, and they should be able to, like you said, a la carte checkbox. Oh yeah, you know, I like that argument. I'll put some money toward that. Um, honestly, like if the government were actually working toward building a better system, always
Mhm.
like it's a job that's never done. It's not like America's number one and we can rest on our laurels, sort of thing, right?
Well,
Like,
like you're really like comparison to science, like yeah, it's never we've never finished. We haven't reached the end of scientific discovery. Like
right,
it will always change. New information changes old uh, conclusions or laws or rules or whatever things that we've built through science. I mean, in a way, to make a different comparison, it's like politics in almost everywhere in the world operates as a hypothesis,
yeah,
um, like the which is pretty shaky, honestly. Yet people still have faith in it that it's going to do something. Like, no, I want to see actual evidence. I want to see something like a product, right? Give me like actual evidence that this thing is working, because it wouldn't work in science to just say, well, I think this is how it's going to go, and like, okay, well, that's good. No, you've got to prove things and peer review those
right.
kinds of things to make sure that it wasn't faulty uh science, essentially.
Yeah. Or just like a weird one-off that
Yeah. Yep.
worked randomly and it could never work again, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and I kind of wonder sometimes, like, the governments of the world have all landed on this idea that democracy is the pinnacle of how a government should operate, but it's still at fault for a
Mm-hmm.
lot of things. Like it's not as efficient as it could be or
Well,
should be.
and here's the thing is that I don't think there's any country in the world that is actually a democracy.
No.
Like, yes, there are democratic elements, but there is no country in the world that's a democracy. And maybe that has its benefits and drawbacks. I mean, in my view, anarchy is the pinnacle of human society, where we've achieved enlightenment to such a degree that we no longer need overlords and dictators telling us what to do. We simply operate smoothly as a society together. That's how I. And yes,
But
it
it's
sounds very
it's still kind of
utopian.
a democracy if you think about it. Like
Oh,
it's more
sure.
of like a floating bubble of democracy. Like,
Yeah.
you kind of vote within your local bubble of
Sure.
what
And
you
that
want,
that will
right?
always exist. And I think having a democratic system is definitely beneficial for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
It has to be something like that, but it will emerge on its own. Like, think of friend
In the
groups, right?
absence of everybody thinking exactly alike, you have to have a democratic system.
Yeah, exactly. Well, human nature just kind of creates democratic systems automatically. Your friend group or whatever, everybody's like, oh, where are we going to go to hang out or whatever, and you kind of vote on it, and it's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, that one friend there, everybody wants to go to this place for dinner, and that one person is like, oh, but I want to go here. Well, you're kind of outvoted, man. And then you just accept it, and next time maybe you make a better argument for why you should go to that other place and
Hmm.
convince people. But that just emerges naturally, these kinds of structures. And so we don't really need a formal structure. We don't need to construct a society when society emerges on its own, just because of humans and the way
Yeah.
humans work together. Like, yeah.
What?
Oh, well, we've gone all over the map here.
Imagine you're like rich enough that you can be like, man, we'd never go out for Thai food. And then you're like, hey, I'm gonna get Celine Dion to do a really sad song about Thai food. And then all my
Mhm.
buddies are gonna be like, okay, let's go to Thai food.
Exactly. Oh man. Yeah. God, we
Well, shit. That was like religion and politics have a lot in common, so it's not totally surprising that it went pretty political, but well, especially dealing with tax.
well, and like you're saying, in various places in the world, the two are kind of intertwined. Like Iran is a good example of religion and politics being kind of one and
Yeah.
the same, and many countries are like that.
Yeah. Like Germany is, it's not really entwined so much as it's just like it's not like a hard divide like the United States tries to make it look like.
Yeah.
But yeah, there it's not like all the way on the other side of the scale like Sharia law sort of thing, but
Mm-hmm.
um and I mean like that could be a whole episode in itself.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Religion
Sure.
like guiding politics and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
um I mean, while they do have a lot in common, the two should be very much their own thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because one is dealing with all hypotheticals, if you
Mm-hmm.
can even call it that, and the other is dealing with like tangible real life situations, and um, the two should be entirely handled separately,
Well,
in
yeah,
my opinion.
that makes sense, and I think religion certainly has a place in society, but certainly shouldn't be running the show.
Right.
That's how you get crusades and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and wars between religions and all that. And that's we don't want to go back to that.
Yeah. And like I said, like I don't know exactly how intertwined it is here in Germany, but like if there are churches that are like actively doing some stuff and receiving tax money to facilitate that, that's okay.
Sure.
If they're not holding up that end of the bargain, well then they're no better than the government.
Exactly. Well, yeah, I mean, they'd be basically a charitable organization that
Mhm.
just simply happens to be religious in nature, which I think
Right.
is fine as long as you're not like brainwashing people or something, like but then again, that's what the government does.
Yeah.
Like we're going to help you, but also at the same time, uh, like,
And as a quick aside, like I don't even think I have a problem with religious organizations like uh refusing employment on the basis of religion, because I mean that's your work environment. Like
mhm.
that's kind of part of what you're doing, right? So
Well, and yeah, it actually makes a whole lot of sense if you think
it
about it
does.
for the smooth operation of your organization. Like if you
Yeah.
have everybody, let's say it's a Christian church that's out there doing stuff for the community, and then you have a couple of like diehard militant atheists or something that join. And, well, there's going to be friction between. I mean, maybe they both have the same goal of like, hey, we want to help people, but there's going to be some friction there.
Like imagine me applying to be a teacher at a Catholic school or something.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, like, well, I mean, I'm the kind of
I'm
atheist.
technically Catholic, so I could. I mean,
Yeah.
but
I mean, I'm the kind of atheist that could easily work within a church if it wasn't too Jesus-y, like if
yeah.
that's fine. I can accept people's beliefs in things like whatever. That's what people believe. And
Yeah.
maybe I might be inclined to have conversations with people, challenge them a little bit.
I'm
But
married to a Christian, it's not like I can't, you know, commingle with people that have religious belief like that.
but I think
That's
we're
a personal thing,
I think we're kind of rare, perhaps.
Yeah. And I mean, like there was a point where I was a very militant atheist, but there was never a point where I was like, I'm not going to speak to you because you're religious.
Mm-hmm.
Like I mean, that religion aside, that's just bigotry, right?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and if you believe your position is correct, I think friendly conversation is the way to change that. like, hey, you know what? Let's have a conversation about our differences and share our ideas together in a peaceful way.
Mhm.
And the truth, or the truth such as it is, will eventually come to the surface and be dominant in those, if people are honest in their conversations, um,
Yeah.
and don't resort to ad hominem and stuff like that, then sure, like I that's the way to do it. And I mean, that's kind of part of our whole philosophy in the show too,
Yeah.
is the Daryl Davis kind of approach.
Right. It would be so great to get, some guests on the show to talk about their religion, because I hope that episodes like this and previous other religious based episodes show that we're respectful in our
Mm-hmm.
um, disagreements or different views.
Sure.
But like the whole goal is to like understand, find common ground,
Mm-hmm.
maybe keep our minds open to a different point of view.
Sure.
None of that can happen if you don't actually have the conversation, though. Like,
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
so come on the show.
Yeah, that would be great. Different religious people, backgrounds, whatever your religion is, I'd like to discuss that with.
And not
And
not
even,
just religion, but like every aspect of life,
oh,
like
for sure.
whether it's sexuality or if you're into this whole furries thing, like
That would be an interesting one.
that
Yeah,
would be actually, yeah.
because
Um,
I don't understand that at all.
I so I dated a girl right before my wife. Her daughter was into that.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember if her daughter was 18 or not, but I was like, oh, that would totally make a cool episode. But then, like things didn't work out or whatever. So like that's out the door. But uh that would be a cool episode to do someday.
Sure. Well, yeah, I'm like, to me, it's a matter of getting thoughts out and having conversations and just exploring different perspectives. That's
Mm-hmm.
I love I had a friend who was Mormon, and I would talk to him a lot about Mormonism. And I think at one point in time he got me a Book of Mormon, which I started to read, just because it was interesting. I'm like, oh, this is an interesting thing and I want to know more about it. Not that I
Mm.
want to join up or anything
Right.
like that and become a Mormon, but like it's just it helps to understand other people, to maybe
Yeah.
be a little bit more accepting, right? Or perhaps have a better conversation with people. If you really do want to change hearts and minds, you really need to uh understand who you're talking to and their way of thinking, because it's probably not the same as yours.
Right.
And I think that leads to healthier conversations and healthier societies in general.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not easy, like
No.
I'm I'm trying to learn German, so that I can communicate with people and understand each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's just really hard.
Mm-hmm.
um, so if you apply that to a philosophy that's entirely different from your own, it's
Mm-hmm.
still going to be super hard. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen from reading one book.
No.
Like it's a constant work in progress, and it's worthy, I
Sure.
think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that helps everybody get along better, because really we should be getting along. These conflicts are artificial and they're born of ignorance. Like the only reason there's so much friction in a society is basically ignorance.
Yeah.
And bigotry is a product of ignorance entirely. Like
Yeah.
it's not that the person is bad, it's that they just don't know. Like
Right.
they're ignorant. Like
In fact, people shouldn't think of bigotry as good versus bad because everybody is a bigot.
mm-hmm. in one way or
everybody.
another. Sure.
Yeah.
And we
Everybody
should,
goes through it.
and we should ourselves individually actively be trying to overcome that.
Yep.
And change that.
Yeah.
And like you can still have your opinion about a thing. Maybe you don't necessarily agree with it, but seeing the other person that you're bigoted against as a human being,
Mm-hmm.
and now and developing an understanding of that person's life and perspective. Well, yeah, it doesn't matter if you like disagree, but there's a difference between just simply like disagreeing and seeing another person as, say, subhuman or evil or whatever.
Right, right. I constantly use this as an example just because it was my biggest bigotry, but like marijuana users. I used to really detest anybody that would smoke pot.
Mm-hmm.
And I never even tried it until I was like 31, 32. I forget.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like it was a gradual journey to get over that.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, like I still have like little seeds, you know, that I have to pluck the weeds every now and then and say, yeah, that's dumb. Get rid of that.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
like it never ends. It never ends.
Sure, it's remnants of old programming essentially.
Yeah.
And yeah, I have similar things that I have to catch myself on where like, oh yeah, that old latent program is still there running in the background, and like it kind of catches the interrupt once, and oh, whoop, okay.
People should talk about that more, I think, because like it doesn't do any good to like stigmatize it and ignore it or try to pretend it isn't there. It's healthy and cathartic to talk about that stuff with people and be honest and forthright, because you know it shows people that their own insecurities and bigotries and stuff aren't so bad, you know.
Yeah.
Well, they aren't so serious or permanent, let's say.
Permanent, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Like they might be bad, they might be super bad, but that doesn't mean you need to punch them in the face over it. It really means more like you need to have a conversation. You need to like commiserate and find common ground and say, you know what, like I had a similar feeling about marijuana, for instance, you know, like as you the neo-Nazi might have with black people, you know, like I understand what you're feeling, but here's how my journey went, you know, like here's where I was like, you know what, maybe I'm being a little bit narrow-minded.
Exactly.
You know? And we all do it. We all do it. We'll do it till the day we die. We'll do it with something, anything. Like we'll come up with new things to be bigots about.
Well, yeah, there's prejudices are just part of human nature, and that it's basically ignorance that it's like.
I'd argue the older you get, the more of a bigot. Really.
Well, because maybe you cease exploring and learning. Maybe you slow down in that, and those pieces of programming get reinforced,
and you get used to being a certain way.
Yeah, exactly. Which I try to avoid as I get older. Like I try to open more doors than close them,
right?
And learn as much as I can.
Changing your environment and your surroundings, people you hang out with, the job you have,
sure,
all this stuff, like any kind of routine digs you into a rut. Even religion, like you shouldn't be afraid to go to a different church.
Even a church that maybe is like a completely different religion than your own. Like within Christianity, there's a whole bunch of choices, but maybe, hey, if you're a Christian of some sort, go to an Islamic church or something and just see,
Yeah. When
make
I
some
was a
friends.
kid, we were all Catholic and stuff, but we would go out to our lake place and there wasn't like a Catholic church anywhere nearby. So
Mhm.
on Sunday, we'd drive into town and go to a Christian church. And I remember thinking, like, this is so different. Like,
Mhm.
why? Like, I was too young to realize the difference between Christianity and Catholicism. I
Mhm.
was like, well, why is this so different? Like, where's the stained glass?
Why is it? Where's all the somberness?
Right. Like it, that was an awesome experience actually, because, like people need to branch out and see other things,
Mhm.
and then, when I was in community college, I was president of a science and skepticism club, and I brought in a panel, a Christian, uh, Messianic Jew, and a guy from Islam, and an atheist, and had the audience asking questions and getting perspectives from four different ways of seeing religion.
That's pretty cool.
And I actually have a recording of that. I really should just like put that up on our channel at some point. Like,
It's a good idea.
if I can find that, like, because that was a super cool discussion.
Mhm.
Uh,
Well, and
and
that's the thing too, is like a lot of times people have these strong beliefs about other people and other ways of thinking, and they never have a conversation. They never think about that. They just have their foregone conclusion and they stick with it and dig in. And like, yeah, that's how you have generational bigotry. And that's definitely not a good thing. I think having those conversations is very healthy. Um, and changing your mind a little bit. Like
yeah,
ultimately, the as far as I'm concerned, the goal is truth for me, for my journey of discovery. And I don't believe I have no uh illusions that I'll ever get there, but that's, I think, just become kind of the goal. It's like
yeah,
I want to find the answers to things. I want to find out what is reality, what is real, how do
yeah.
things actually work, you know and
I'm I like the big picture, and in order to understand the big picture, you have to know a little bit of a lot of things.
yep.
So it's always been super interesting to me to learn a little bit of this, a little bit of that, get experience over here and over there. I've never really stuck with a job longer than, I don't know, 6 years
Mm-hmm.
or something. Um, and I, here in Germany, that's kind of a detriment. It's a little harder to find a job because they see that as a negative. It's like, oh, you can't really like devote yourself to something, right? But like
Mm-hmm.
I can. It's just I find more value in a diverse array of knowledge.
Sure.
Uh, it's served me much better to be able to think outside the box than
Mm-hmm.
to be narrow minded.
And that actually should be, as an employer, that should be seen as a like an extreme benefit.
Yeah. I mean, at least for certain positions,
Sure.
like if you need an expert for certain things, no doubt,
Yeah.
obviously, but you also need somebody with a different perspective.
Well,
Like,
like, yeah, what I do in my line of work, it calls upon essentially every experience or piece of knowledge that I've gained in my life, like all the time, like troubleshooting stuff and these weird issues that, yeah, I mean, when I work in a field that has an IT title, but I really don't deal with computers that much. And the problems that I deal with aren't even really related to computers. It's related to kind of everything.
hmm,
Um, and it's challenging at times, but fun. And yeah, like but I wouldn't be able to do the things that I can do if it weren't for all of those previous experiences, including when we ran the business. Like, and even that too, running that business, that like I didn't learn all of those things in one place. And I certainly didn't go to school for any of that stuff, like being able to repair printers and troubleshoot problems and stuff. That was done on the side.
Well, even our customer base provides a kind of experience, because this last week we tried to get a puppy, but it didn't really get along with our old dog, and we had to find a new home like ASAP because it was super stressful trying to keep them separate.
Mm-hmm.
And a roofer came by to look at the dog, and I was like, oh, he's coming with cash. And my wife was like, "Are you sure?" I was like, "I'm sure." Like, do you remember our one customer? I don't even remember his name, but like he had like a computer monitor bigger than most people's TV.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. The roofing company. They had like a
Yeah.
palatial house on a hill, and
Yeah. And
mm-hmm.
I was like, these guys make good money. It's summer. So especially like right now,
Yep.
like he's coming with cash, and he was a cool guy and stuff. And so like, like knowing that was kind of a comfort, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not even like work related, right?
Yeah.
It's just life.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's life knowledge that comes in handy at some point.
Sure. Well, and it gives you, like you said, the big picture. It gives you a better understanding of kind of the reality of things, like how do things actually operate, what that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And which can also lead to better decisions. Well, obviously, like I mean, and that's the thing that I take issue with when it comes to politics. For instance, is like, well, these people are politicians. That's all they've ever done. And so, how can they possibly make a better decision than somebody who's actually possesses knowledge of all the things?
Right.
Like, of course, they're not going to make very good decisions.
It's kind of funny. Like we recently talked about the identity fallacy and how people think, oh, you're not an expert. What could you know? Like, how could you have any kind of opinion on this? But I mean, the opposite has a strong argument too. Like, oh, you've never looked at anything else in your entire life. How do you know you're not missing the big picture?
Sure. Well, I constantly surprise my superiors with ideas or knowledge or questions about things that they hadn't even considered. And it's like, well, these people all have degrees, in some cases master's degrees, and all these certifications, and here I am with none of those. And like, I'm the one that's like, hey, this is going to be an issue, and they're like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. Like, oh, well, experience is better than education, I guess, in that regard.
My first job with my biology degree, I got my foot in the door as a facilities guy, and then eventually got hired on as in the biology department. And one of the early weekly meetings, we had a new vice president of research and development from Switzerland. Mm-hmm. And he came in and he said, I'm open to hearing anybody's ideas. And I was like, oh, well, I'm going to jump on that. And I went to lunch right after the meeting, and I did some research, and I came up with an idea in half an hour. And I put together a presentation, and I brought it to him. And I ended up with my name on a provisional patent application with no PhD, no master's. Like that's unheard of. Like he was like, that's a great idea. And, like the only reason it actually never got like off the ground is because the board of directors were like, that's gene therapy. We're more in the small molecule stuff. And I'm like, what the fuck? And then after that, they laid everybody off. Then they took my idea and tried to run with it. But whatever.
Figures. Well, and that's why Toyota is so successful. Like why their product is so good is their philosophy of operations, where they it's like a Kaizen kind of thing for one, but they also take in information from everybody at every level and put that into the analysis. So even people in the factory floor that all they do all day is put door panels on, they're taking their information in,
that is smart.
Yeah.
That's super smart.
Yep. And basically the goal is similar to mine, is like, hey, they essentially want to try to create the perfect product. Obviously that's unachievable, but because that's their goal, their product is much more vastly superior to everybody else's. I mean, there are Toyotas that have driven for 1,000,000 miles with just basic maintenance. And that's completely nuts. And that's basically a testament to the way they do things. And so it's, but it's not because there's a bunch of brilliant geniuses up at the top there making these decisions. No, they realize that they're fallible, that they don't know all the things that can be known. And so they try to collect as much information as possible all the way down the chain, and accept imperfection as being something that happens. Like, hey, we're not Bentley that thinks that our cars are the best possible car ever. It's like, well, that doesn't get you very far, does it? They're like, no, we will make mistakes. There will be flaws. There's going to be errors. We should accept them and identify them, and then figure out how to improve them slowly, methodically. And
there's a reason that everybody is subject to the impulse to call another person an idiot, because everybody at some point knows a little bit something more than another person in a certain aspect of intellect, let's say.
Yeah.
Everybody, absolutely everybody. Now, you could be a country bumpkin, and I come along with my biology degree and try to shoe a horse. And you're like, you fucking idiot. What are you doing?
Yeah. You'd be struggling with it for days.
I am an idiot when it comes to shoeing a horse,
And then they just come up and they're like, bang, 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 boom, there you go. You scrape it off and you're done. Like, what the hell? Or how to fix a tractor or something, right?
Right.
That kind of
so like, we shouldn't be so quick to insult, but we should also remember that, like, no one's really an idiot.
No.
When you think about it, like, everybody's got a certain amount of life experience that has prepared them for whatever.
Sure. And there's no way that anybody can have enough life experience in enough fields to be like considered to be super smart, basically, to be not an idiot. Like, the smartest person on the planet is an idiot in some realm or another.
Unless you're an immortal and there can be only one.
Exactly. Well, that's true. Yeah, if you live for thousands of years, you might be less an idiot than other people, but that depends. It depends on what you've been exposed to. Like, if
I put thought into that, actually, and you would still forget stuff just as quickly as the rest of us do.
Well, right? and consider this too. If you had been alive for 1,000 years, most of your experience would be like pre-industrial revolution. Right. So you'd know a lot of completely useless pieces of information, and potentially ones that have been disproven or whatever.
The only
you might end up being 1,000-year-old
professionalism too is like the human condition.
You might be a 1,000-year-old flat earther or something like that. It's like,
oh God.
So
I told Copernicus he was a fucking idiot.
Oh man. Yeah. Wow. This has come all around. This is
even the flat Earth. Wow.
Oh, well, now we're probably going to get that little thing down at the bottom. That's, the
Right.
Wikipedia banner, just because we mentioned it like near the end of the episode.
I hope so, because then people will be like waiting around for that part of the episode and they'll see the whole episode.
Yeah. Oh man, and then it'll be like
Thanks, YouTube.
yeah, it'll be like blue balls. Basically, they wait around and wait and
The
wait. And
earth
wait.
is flat, YouTube algorithm. The earth is flat.
Water finds its own level. NASA, they're lying.
The sun moves around way different than we thought it did.
Antarctica, it's a giant wall. Oh man. Oh man. Well, maybe that's a good point to end on. And then we can see if the algorithm picks that out or not.
Not that we're
Without-
calling flat earthers idiots.
No. Well,
But,
it's ignorance. Actually, that's another thing. It's ignorance.
Yeah.
And that can be forgiven, I think. Well, okay, so ignorance can be forgiven as long as someone's goal is to improve themselves, to learn all they can and become more knowledgeable and wiser and more enlightened. If somebody closes off everything like la la la, I can't hear you, okay, then I don't know that I can forgive that in the moment, because that you've just basically given up at that point. So the same thing, like bigotry or whatnot. It's like, okay, if you're somebody who is bigoted about something, someone, a certain type of person or whatever, I could forgive that if you're willing to have conversations and try to understand people.
Yeah.
I think it's
even with science, you have to continually reaffirm your own knowledge because things do change. So like you might be inclined to think like, well, when I was in school 15 years ago, this was definitely the case, but maybe that changed. Maybe science prevailed with new information on it. So like if you fall into that rut of thinking that you're absolutely right all the time, like I still do this. Like I still, if I need to provide somebody with reassurance, I check myself on, hey, am I still right about this? Because there have been plenty of things where, my programmed thinking has met with new data.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure. And you have to readjust from time to time.
For sure. Well, and yeah, you could forget things, or like you said, new information. There's all kinds of things, and I think it's always an ongoing process, like your own human evolution, your mental evolution. It's never finished.
Yeah.
There's always going to be ways to improve, which goes into that whole philosophy of Kaizen. It's like, okay, there is no such thing as perfection, but I'm striving towards it. That is my goal ultimately, even though it's like the rainbow on the other side of the hill, which you're never going to get to because the rainbow keeps moving. It's you can still try to get there. Make that be your life's goal, is to achieve enlightenment and perfection. But don't think of yourself as perfect, because obviously you are not.
Yeah.
Like you're never going to be perfect.
Be prepared to actually be right and still not be able to convince anybody. Because I run into that a lot too, and it's frustrating. It's like,
well,
I've got the data here. I've got the prior knowledge. Those match up. I have a lot of confidence in this, but still I'm not able to convince people.
And that's basically, it comes down to ignorance, essentially. And you, because your way of thinking would be clearly different than their way of thinking. Like people like you and I, we would be convinced by data, right? Like, oh, hey, scientific method has yielded this information. So I put a lot more trust in that than something that hasn't gone through that process. So that is a convincing argument to me or you, but not everybody works that way. A lot of people, they don't. It's emotional. Like emotive arguments carry a lot more weight than logical ones, and so understanding how a particular person thinks would help, I suppose. But then again, I don't know about like changing to emotive arguments to make a logical adjustment, because then you're not guiding the person to a better understanding of things. You're basically just convincing a person of a specific thing, and that's that. I think it's better to work on the ground level, like start from the base and help people learn how to learn and learn
Yeah.
how to understand guide people towards an appreciation of understanding that, hey, enlightenment and knowledge are fantastic things. And
Yeah. But I mean, sometimes just giving someone the helping hand they need to get in the right rut
mhm, or
allows
get
them
out
to,
of an old rut.
yeah, allows them to see like what brings people into that particular rut.
But
Like,
actually, that's a really good point in that it's sort of like it's like this. There's like a wall almost that seems like it's insurmountable, but once you get over that all of a sudden everything becomes so much easier.
yeah.
Like it may cascade into all kinds of understanding, that like it's sort of it's like opening a floodgate basically.
Well, it's like using cheat codes on video games, right? Like some people just automatically assume that's lazy. There's no fun in that. But it also gives you a glimpse from another perspective that allows you to then go back and find that information or that path on your own.
Mm-hmm.
And who's to say that's a bad thing? Like, if that's what it takes to get you over that hurdle.
Well, that's a good point, actually, in discovery, the frustration, the inability to do something like you're playing a video game or something that's really hard and you just can't seem to get anywhere. So turning on God mode so you can leisurely move your way through things. And now that frustration and fear or whatever, that emotional stuff is gone because, well, there's no risk. So
Right.
you're now free to explore. And that, because oftentimes fear is a barrier, emotion is a barrier to understanding, and being
Yeah.
able to release that emotion allows you to learn more, I think. And so
God mode kind of facilitates the ability to create analogical thinking because that option being open to you opens up so many doors to see things differently that it builds pathways in your brain.
mhm.
And anyway, I'm hypothesizing it does
Mhm.
that, like there are other ways to see things, and it might kind of train you to look from other perspectives in future problems
Mhm.
and find new ways to solve them that you wouldn't have if you didn't have the ability to think like ahead a few steps. Like, if I have solved this, how did I get there?
Yeah.
Like that sort of past impossible, never tense of thinking, um, from a future imperfect where you can sort of build things backwards and figure out then how to get there from an
Mhm.
imaginary sort of, I don't know if I'm explaining that well, but
I I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's sort of like my whole philosophy of life as a game, right? Like that completely changes the way I conduct my life, like stoicism and things too. Um, and so, like for instance, I follow pretty much the universal troubleshooting process when trying to solve a problem. And so, for instance, like a car breaks down on the side of the road, people get frustrated or whatever. There's emotion in there, and the emotion becomes like it takes center stage, and it distracts you from being able to solve the problem. Whereas if you have adopt the principle where it's like, okay, well, this thing happened. Okay, well, let's go through this process, right? I'm going to go through and I'm going to check this and I'll check that. And yeah, maybe you get a little frustrated every once in a while. A car breaks down and it's raining or something. Well, that could be
It's always raining when the car breaks.
Yeah, exactly. But you can still have this process that you fall back on that you follow, and that then becomes center stage. That, oh, this is the conductor of this uh of this song or whatever, and that's what I'm going to follow. And instead of just kind of winging it and getting frustrated and angry and things, like, oh yeah, I have this process that I follow every time. Like, okay, you stop and you calm down and then you replicate the problem, and that you go through all these things, you change a variable and see what it does, and then there you go. And it's pretty much worked for me all the time. And so it's become kind of a habit, essentially, of like, oh, now like things happen and whatever. I'm like, okay, this thing happened. Like, it's no big deal. Whereas people, and this does go back to ignorance, I guess. If you don't know anything about a car, then a breakdown is a huge deal and it can be very emotional.
Yeah.
But if you know a whole bunch of stuff about cars, then, well, it's simply an inconvenience.
If you don't know, now you know.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that kind of philosophy or reasoning or whatever applies to everything, life in general.
Yeah. It's amazing how church tax could go all the way into this deep philosophical zone,
I know.
kind of cutting through politics and ending in like rational thought. And it's actually super interesting that religion could lead to rational thought in a conversation, right?
Only here on Kitchen Sink is that possible. But I think they're all interwoven, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, anything that is a concept should be taken seriously because it might have something to contribute to the bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
However irrational it may seem in a particular perspective, in another perspective, it might make all the sense.
And that's where the free flow of information is critical, like globally.
Yeah.
Ideas ought to be shared and expanded on and tested and things like that. I think, and it's also important to recognize that not all ideas will be correct, and maybe your idea is not correct, and that's okay. Like, the important thing is to correct it if you're incorrect. Like, accept
the earth is not flat.
Yeah. Being able to accept mistakes and failure is, I think, a really important life skill. And it's a perspective shift, really, that brings that around. It's like, it's not, well, okay, you just didn't know the answer. I mean, you should be mad at yourself for failing if you're omnipotent and omniscient, right? If you are a god and you make a stupid mistake, well, okay, beat yourself up over it. But if you're not a god, then that's okay. There's no way everybody has the answers to everything and knows the correct way to do things. And in fact, it's also important to recognize that there's more than one correct way, that there are a multitude of different methods that can yield a particular result. And, to varying degrees of success, I suppose. And that's another important thing to understand. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just watching some old like home movies from when I was maybe like 2 years old. And I was in the backyard doing various exploring, and I would fall down every now and then, like really bite it pretty hard. And I was in my head, I was like, oh, that little kid's about to cry.
Mm-hmm.
But instead, 2-year-old me just like gets up and like dusts off and like tries it a different way. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
No way was I like always like that. Like,
oh man, that's interesting.
like you really expect like a certain thing. And I don't know, like not to say that like people are born a certain way and can't become that or change to that or even change away from something, but like I just thought that was kind of a funny thing. Like it was programmed into my head to like see a kid fall and instantly they'd be crying, and I was like watching myself and I was like, oh, he's gonna cry. And then he didn't, and I was like, oh
wow,
interesting.
That's funny. Yeah. Well, I think we've yeah,
probably because I'm a robot, but
probably. Yeah, well, you can go hang out with Mark Zuckerberg then. Have your robot time together then. Oh man,
drink WD-40.
Yeah. Oh man, drinking your cans of oil. Well, I think we've yammered on long enough for one episode.
And I jabber at you.
Oh man. Well, I think we really covered a whole bunch of different things.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right.
Well, thanks everybody for sticking out with us. And yeah.
Deep sink diving into religion and tax and government and being a better human being.
Yeah. Exactly. Try to be awesome.
Nanu nanu.